They tell you that leadership is about making the hard choices. They don't tell you that sometimes the hardest choice isn't between right and wrong, but between two different kinds of hell. I am Commander Alara Vance, and on April 18th, 2026, I didn't just lose a battle. I lost my soul to save a world that will never know my name. This isn't a story about glory. It's a story about the silence that follows the scream. If you think you know what sacrifice means, listen closely. Because I'm about to tell you how I burned my friend alive to keep the lights on for everyone else. And if you're still here after hearing that, then maybe, just maybe, you're ready to understand the weight of the crown. The first thing you notice isn't the heat. It's the sound, or rather, the lack of it. On the USS Aegis, a floating fortress of steel and fusion technology anchored 3 miles off the coast of what used to be Seattle, silence is a luxury we couldn't afford. The ship hummed. It was a constant, low-frequency thrum that vibrated in your teeth, a reminder that the heart of the vessel, the Mark IV compact fusion reactor, was beating. It was the sound of life. It was the sound of power. It was the sound of safety. Until it stopped. I was in the command center, or CIC, as we called it, staring at a holographic map of the Pacific Theater. The date was April 18th, 2026. The air conditioning was fighting a losing battle against the humidity of the early spring, and the smell of stale coffee and ozone hung heavy in the air. My second-in-command, Lieutenant Marcus Rook Thorne, was leaning over my shoulder, pointing at a blip on the radar that turned out to be nothing more than a school of migrating tuna confusing the sonar array. "Commander," Rook said, his voice carrying that familiar, dry wit that kept us sane during the long watches. "If those fish keep testing our defenses, I'm going to request a transfer to the submarine corps. At least down there, the enemies are quiet." I smiled, not taking my eyes off the screen. "Submarines are cramped, Rook. You'd miss my charming personality." "I miss my personal space," he shot back, grinning, "and my ability to stretch my legs without hitting a bulkhead." Around us, the CIC was a symphony of controlled chaos. Ensign Sarah Jenkins, our comms officer, was humming along to a song only she could hear, her fingers dancing across her console. Chief Engineer David McAllister was on the video link from engineering, his face smeared with grease, complaining about the new filtration system that kept clogging with salt deposits. It was normal. It was routine. It was the kind of boredom that makes soldiers complacent. Then the hum died. It wasn't a gradual fade. It was an abrupt cessation, like a heart stopping mid-beat. The lights flickered once, twice, and then the emergency red bathing lamps kicked in, casting long, bloody shadows across the room. The holographic map shattered into pixels and vanished. "Report," I barked, my voice cutting through the sudden, deafening silence. "Power loss in Sector 4, Jenkins said, her voice trembling slightly. She was young, barely 22, but she had ice in her veins when it counted. "Main grid is offline. Backup generators are failing to engage." "Mac," I said, tapping my comms badge. "Mac, talk to me. What's happening in engineering?" Static. Then a voice strained and tight. "Commander, we have a containment breach in the primary reactor core. Temperature spikes are off the charts. We're reading 4,000 degrees Kelvin and climbing. The magnetic confinement field is destabilizing." My stomach dropped. 4,000 degrees. That wasn't just hot. That was plasma. That was the sun. "Initiate emergency scram," I ordered. "Drop the control rods. Flood the chamber with coolant." "I can't." Mac's voice cracked. "The hydraulic systems are fused. The rods are stuck. Alara, the core is going critical. If we don't vent the pressure, the containment vessel will rupture." "If it ruptures..." He didn't need to finish the sentence. A rupture of the Mark IV reactor wouldn't just destroy the Aegis. It would create a radioactive plume that would drift east, contaminating the entire West Coast. Millions would die. Cities would become ghost towns. The fallout would last for centuries. "How long?" I asked, my voice steady despite the terror clawing at my throat. 10 minutes, Max said. "Maybe 12 if we're lucky. But the radiation levels in engineering are already lethal. We can't send a team in to manually override the locks. They'd be dead before they reach the door." I looked around the CIC. The red light painted everyone's faces in shades of gore. Rook was staring at me, his eyes wide, waiting for orders. Jenkins had stopped humming. The other officers were frozen, looking to me for salvation. I was the commander. I was supposed to have the answers. I was supposed to be the one who saved the day. But there was no saving this. Not in the way we wanted. Rook, I said, turning to him. Give me the schematic for Deck 7. Rook frowned, confusion furrowing his brow. Deck 7? That's the secondary habitation deck. Crew quarters, mess hall, recreational facilities. Why? Because Deck 7 is directly above the reactor core, I said, my mind racing, connecting dots that I prayed were wrong. And it has the manual override for the external blast doors. The ones that seal the reactor section off from the rest of the ship. Rook's face went pale. Alara, if you seal those doors, you trap anyone on Deck 7 inside the radiation zone. When the core breaches, that deck becomes a tomb. I know, I said softly. There are 42 people on Deck 7, Rook whispered. 42 souls. Including Jenny. Jenny, Lieutenant Jennifer Hayes. My friend. The woman who had shared her last chocolate bar with me during the blockade of 24. The woman who was currently probably sleeping off her night shift, unaware that her world was ending. I know. I repeated, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. We can't do that, Rook said, his voice rising. We can't just sacrifice them. There has to be another way. We could try to reroute power from the auxiliary engines. We can try to... There is no time, Rook. I snapped, the command voice taking over, suppressing the human part of me that wanted to scream. If the core breaches, the explosion will tear the ship in half. The radiation will kill everyone on board, and then drift to the mainland. Do you want to explain to the president why Seattle is glowing in the dark? Do you want to look those millions of families in the eye and tell them you hesitated? Rook flinched. He looked down at his console, his hands shaking. No, Commander. Then, give me the schematic. Now. He typed furiously, the holographic display flickering back to life in a dim, monochrome green. The layout of Deck 7 appeared. I saw the locations of the crew. Most were in their quarters. Some were in the mess hall. Jenny was in the gym, likely running on the treadmill, listening to her podcast, thinking about her upcoming leave. Mac, I said into the comms. Is there any way to evacuate Deck 7? Negative. Mac's voice came back hollow. The radiation leakage is already sealing the corridors. The automatic doors have locked down to prevent spread. The only way out is through the reactor access tunnel, which is currently a microwave oven. Anyone trying to leave Deck 7 is already dead. They just don't know it yet. The cruelty of the universe was precise. It didn't give us a chance to be heroes. It gave us a choice between being murderers or being corpses. Jenkins, I said, open a channel to Deck 7. General broadcast. Jenkins looked at me, tears welling in her eyes. Commander, what do I say? Tell them. I paused, my throat closing up. Tell them there is a containment breach. Tell them to stay in their quarters. Tell them I love them. Jenkins nodded, her fingers hovering over the keys. She took a deep breath, steadying herself, and opened the channel. Attention all personnel on Deck 7. Her voice echoed through the CIC speakers, calm and professional, masking the horror beneath. This is Ensign Jenkins. We are experiencing a critical reactor malfunction. Please remain in your current locations. Do not attempt to evacuate. Repeat, do not attempt to evacuate. Secure your doors and wait for further instructions. God bless you all. Silence followed. A heavy, suffocating silence. I looked at the timer on the main screen. 8 minutes. Rook, I said, prepare to seal the blast doors. I'll do it from here. You monitor the structural integrity of the hull. If the pressure gets too high, we might blow the seals anyway. Rook didn't move. He stood there, staring at the schematic, at the little green dots representing his friends. Marcus, I said, using his first name. Do it. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of hatred and respect. He hated me for making him do this. He respected me for having the strength to ask. Commander, he whispered. I placed my hand on the console. The interface was simple. A single virtual button, labeled Deck 7 Isolation Protocol. Pressing it would engage the massive titanium blast doors that separated Deck 7 from the rest of the ship. It would seal 42 people in a box with a dying star. I thought of Jenny. I thought of the way she laughed when she spilled coffee on her uniform. I thought of the promise we made to each other, that we'd both make it home to see the cherry blossoms in D.C. next spring. I pressed the button. A deep, mechanical groan vibrated through the floorboards. The sound of heavy doors sliding shut locking into place. On the schematic, the section for Deck 7 turned from green to red. Sealed. Seals engaged, Rook said, his voice devoid of emotion. Radiation containment holding for now. I slumped back in my chair, the adrenaline draining out of me, leaving me cold and empty. I had just killed 42 people. I had signed their death warrants with the press of a finger. Mac, I said. Status. Core temperature stabilizing slightly, Mac reported. The isolation seems to have reduced the pressure buildup, but it's still critical. We need to vent the remaining energy. Vent it where? I asked. Overboard, Mac said. But the vents are on the port side, near Deck 7. If we open them, the radiation will spray out, but the heat might compromise the seals we just closed. Do it, I said. Better the radiation escapes into the ocean than builds up inside the ship. Understood. Initiating vent sequence. I watched the sensors. The temperature readings began to drop, slowly. The immediate threat of explosion was receding. But the cost was sitting in my chest, a heavy stone that I knew would never dissolve. Commander, Jenkins said softly. I'm picking up signals from Deck 7. I froze. What kind of signals? Comms traffic, personal devices. They're saying goodbye. I closed my eyes. I couldn't listen. I couldn't hear the voices of the people I had just condemned. But I couldn't turn it off either. It was my penance. Mom, I love you. Tell Sarah I'm sorry I forgot our anniversary. It's getting hot in here. Commander Vance, if you can hear this, I understand. That last one hit me like a physical blow. Jenny, she knew. She understood the math. She knew that her life was the prize for the survival of the many. Cut the audio, I whispered. Jenkins looked at me, pain in her eyes. Commander, cut the audio, ensign. That's an order. She obeyed. The silence returned, but it was different now. It was filled with the ghosts of the 42. Rook, I said, standing up. My legs felt weak, but I forced them to hold me. Take command of the CIC. I'm going to engineering. Sir. Rook looked up, surprised. You can't go down there. The radiation levels. I need to see Mac, I said. I need to see what's left of my ship. And I need to make sure that Core stays dead. It's suicide, Rook said. Maybe, I said. But I'm the one who sent them to die. The least I can do is watch the fire burn. I walked out of the CIC, leaving Rook and Jenkins behind. The corridor was dimly lit, the red emergency lights pulsing like a slow heartbeat. I walked past the sealed door to Deck 7. It was cold to the touch, the metal thick and unyielding. Behind it, I knew the air was becoming toxic, the heat rising. I placed my hand on the door for a second, a silent apology to the friends I had betrayed. Then I continued toward engineering, toward the heart of the beast I had tamed at the cost of my humanity. As I walked, I realized that the story wasn't over. The reactor was stable, but the ship was wounded, and I was broken. But we were still afloat. And as long as we were afloat, we had a duty to remember, a duty to survive. I checked my dosimeter. The needle was already twitching into the yellow zone. I ignored it. I had bigger things to worry about than my own health. I had a ship to save, and I had a guilt to carry. The walk to engineering felt like a march to the gallows. But I kept walking, because that's what commanders do. We walk into the fire, so others don't have to, even if we're the ones who lit the match. The elevator ride down to engineering was a descent into hell. Not the biblical kind with demons and fire, but the modern industrial kind. The kind where the air smells of burnt insulation and fear, and the walls sweat condensation that tastes like copper. I stepped out onto the engineering deck, and the heat hit me like a wall. It wasn't the scorching inferno of the reactor core itself, that was contained behind 3 feet of lead and steel, but the residual heat from the system struggling to cope with the aftermath. The air was thick, humid, and heavy with the scent of ozone and something else, something metallic and sweet. Blood? No, just the smell of overheated electronics. But my mind supplied the image of blood anyway. Mac was waiting for me by the main console. He looked worse than I had expected. His uniform was torn, his face covered in soot, and his eyes were bloodshot. He was holding a rag to his arm, where a burn mark blistered the skin. Commander, he said, nodding respectfully. He didn't smile. There was no room for smiles here. Report, Mac, I said, keeping my voice level. I needed to be the commander, not the friend. Not yet. Core is stable, he said, gesturing to the monitors. Temperature is down to acceptable levels. The magnetic field is holding. We've successfully vented the excess plasma into the ocean. The environmental sensors show a localized spike in radiation in the water, but it's dispersing quickly. The currents will dilute it within hours. No significant threat to the coastline. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Good work, Mac. You saved the ship. We saved the ship, he corrected me. You made the call. I just pulled the levers. He looked at me, really looked at me, and I saw the judgment in his eyes. It wasn't angry. It was sad. He knew what I had done. He knew the cost, and he knew that I would carry it for the rest of my life. What about the crew? I asked, dreading the answer. Deck 7 is gone, Max said quietly. The radiation levels inside are fatal. Within minutes of the seal, the dose would have been lethal. They didn't suffer long. The heat would have knocked them unconscious before the radiation sickness set in. They didn't suffer long. It was a small mercy, but it felt like a lie. Did they suffer? Did they panic? Did they pound on the doors, screaming for help that I had deliberately withheld? I would never know. And that ignorance was its own kind of torture. Recovery teams? I asked. Can't go in, Max said. Not for at least 6 months. Maybe longer. We'll have to remote drone the bodies out. If there's anything left to recover. I nodded. Understood. Start the decontamination protocols for the rest of the ship. I want every surface scrubbed. Every filter replaced. I want the ship clean. Yes, Commander. I walked over to the main reactor viewports. Through the thick glass, I could see the core. It was no longer the bright, blue-white sphere of pure energy it usually was. It was dull, gray, and cracked, like a dead eye staring back at me. I heard them. I said, my voice barely a whisper. Mac didn't pretend not to know who I meant. Jenkins patched the audio through. For a minute, I said. Jenny, she said she understood. Mac looked away, his jaw tightening. Jenny was a good officer. She knew the stakes. We all do. That's the job. Is it? I asked. Is the job to kill our friends? The job is to protect the mission, Max said firmly. And the mission is to keep this ship operational. To keep the peace. To keep the world safe. Sometimes the math doesn't care about our feelings. The math, I repeated. Cold comfort, Mac. It's the only comfort we have, he said. If we start thinking about the individuals, we'll freeze. And if we freeze, everyone dies. You did what you had to do, Alara. Don't let the guilt eat you alive. You need to be strong for the rest of them. He was right. I knew he was right. But knowing it didn't make it hurt less. I turned away from the viewport. What's the damage to the ship's systems? Significant, Max said, shifting into professional mode. The power surge fried half the auxiliary circuits. We're running on backup batteries for non-essential systems. Life support is stable, but we're conserving energy. Propulsion is offline. We're drifting. Drifting, I said, in a radioactive zone. Not for long, Max said. Tugboats are already en route. Coast Guard picked up our distress beacon. They'll be here in 2 hours. 2 hours. 2 hours to sit with my thoughts. 2 hours to wait for the rescue that would bring questions I wasn't ready to answer. Go get that arm looked at, I ordered Mac. I'll take the watch here. Commander, you should rest. That's an order, Chief, I said. Go. He hesitated, then nodded. Aye, Commander. He left, leaving me alone in the engineering deck. The hum of the ship was different now. It was weaker, erratic, like a patient on life support. I sat down in the engineer's chair, the leather worn and cracked. I stared at the monitors, watching the numbers tick by. Radiation levels, temperature, pressure, all stable, all safe. But I didn't feel safe. I felt exposed. My comms badge beeped. It was Rook. Commander, he said. Coast Guard is hailing us. They want a status report. And they want to speak to the commanding officer. I took a deep breath. Put them through, Rook. Patch it to my private channel. Understood. A moment later, a voice crackled in my ear. USS Aegis, this is Coast Guard Cutter Valiant. We have you on visual. Please confirm status of crew and vessel. It was Captain Halloway. I knew him. We had played poker together during the joint exercises last year. He was a good man. A fair man. Captain Halloway, I said, my voice steady. This is Commander Vance. Vessel status is critical, but stable. Reactor incident contained. No threat to public safety. There was a pause. Commander, we're picking up some unusual readings from your lower decks. High radiation signatures. Is there a breach? I closed my eyes. Here it came. The question I had been dreading. There was a containment failure, I said carefully. We were forced to isolate Deck 7 to prevent a catastrophic explosion. The deck was sealed. Another pause. Longer this time. Sealed? Commander, are you telling me there are crew members trapped on Deck 7? Yes, I said. Are they alive? I swallowed the lump in my throat. No, Captain. They are not. Silence on the other end. I could imagine Holloway's face, the shock, the disbelief. Commander, he said, his voice softer now. How many? 42, I said. 42, he repeated. God help us. They saved the ship, I said, the words coming out automatically. They saved the coast. It was the only option. I believe you, Holloway said. But, Alara, you know the inquiry that's coming. The Navy won't take this lightly. Sacrificing an entire deck, it's unprecedented. I know, I said. I'm ready for it. Are you? He asked. Because I've seen commanders break under less. Don't let them break you. You did your duty. Remember that. Thank you, Captain, I said. When will you board? 30 minutes. We're sending a hazmat team first. They'll secure the reactor area. Then, we'll come aboard. Understood. Aegis out. I cut the connection. 30 minutes. 30 minutes until the world came crashing in. Until the reporters, the investigators, the families. I stood up and walked to the window again. The ocean was dark, choppy. The lights of the Valiant were visible in the distance, approaching like angels of judgment. I thought about Jenny again. I thought about the last time I saw her. She had been laughing, holding a cup of coffee, telling me about her niece's birthday party. She had been so alive, so vibrant, and now she was gone, reduced to a statistic, a number in a report. I felt a tear slide down my cheek. I wiped it away angrily. I couldn't cry. Not yet. I had to be strong. I had to be the commander. But inside I was screaming. The door to engineering slid open. Rook walked in. He looked exhausted, his uniform disheveled. He walked over to me and stood silently for a moment. They're here, he said. I know, I said. What do we tell them? He asked. The investigators. The press. The truth, I said. We tell them the truth. We tell them that we had no choice. We tell them that 42 heroes died so that millions could live. Rook nodded. And what do we tell ourselves? I looked at him. We tell ourselves that we did our job. And then we try to forgive ourselves. He didn't look convinced. Forgiveness is a hard thing to come by, Alara. I know, I said. But it's the only thing that keeps us going. The ship shuddered slightly as the Valiant pulled alongside. The docking clamps engaged with a loud clang. The sound of boots on metal echoed through the corridors. The invasion had begun. I straightened my uniform. I smoothed my hair. I put on the mask of the commander. The mask that hid the grief, the guilt, the fear. Let's go meet them, I said. Rook fell in step beside me. We walked out of engineering up the ladder toward the main deck, toward the light, toward the judgment. As we walked, I passed the sealed door to Deck 7 again. I didn't stop this time. I couldn't. If I stopped, I might never start again. But I whispered a promise to the door. I will remember you, I said. I will make sure the world knows your names. I will not let you be forgotten. It was a small promise, a fragile one, but it was all I had. We reached the airlock. The door hissed open. The bright lights of the Valiant flooded the corridor, blinding me for a second. I squinted, stepping forward into the light. The hazmat team was there, clad in yellow suits, their faces hidden behind visors. Behind them, Captain Holloway stood, his face grim. Commander Vance, he said, saluting. I returned the salute. Captain Holloway. We have control of the ship, he said. You and your senior staff are to remain in the briefing room. We'll begin the investigation immediately. Understood, I said. He looked at me, his eyes searching mine. Alara, he said, using my first name. I am sorry. So am I said. We walked past him toward the briefing room. The journey was short, but it felt like miles. Every step was heavy. Every breath was a struggle. When we entered the briefing room, Rook closed the door behind us. We were alone. He slumped into a chair, putting his head in his hands. What now? He asked. Now, I said, sitting down opposite him, we wait. And we prepare. Because the hard part isn't over. The hard part is living with it. He looked up at me. Can we do that? Live with it? I don't know, I admitted. But we have to try. For them. He nodded slowly. For them. We sat in silence, waiting for the knock on the door. Waiting for the questions. Waiting for the verdict. Outside, the ocean churned. The wind howled. And somewhere, deep in the belly of the ship, the ghosts of Deck 7 watched and waited. I closed my eyes and listened to the silence. It was louder than the scream. The inquiry lasted for 3 weeks. 3 weeks of sterile rooms, bright lights, and probing questions. They asked me about the timeline. They asked me about the decision-making process. They asked me if I considered other options. I answered them all with the same precision. I laid out the facts. I showed them the data. I explained the physics. I told them that there was no other way. Some of the investigators believed me. Others didn't. They looked at me with suspicion, with disgust. They saw a monster, a commander who sacrificed her own people. But I didn't care what they saw. I cared about the truth. And the truth was that I had saved the world. At the end of the inquiry, the admiral himself came to see me. He was an old man, with eyes like flint. He sat across from me in the small office they had assigned me on the base. "Commander Vance," he said, "the board has reached a decision." I waited. My heart pounded in my chest, but I kept my face neutral. "You will be relieved of command," he said. I nodded. I had expected it. "However," he continued, "you will not be court-martialed. The board recognizes that your actions, while extreme, were necessary to prevent a catastrophic event. You acted within the parameters of emergency protocol. You saved millions of lives." "Thank you, sir," I said. "But," he said, raising a hand, "you cannot remain in active service. The psychological toll, the precedent, it's too much. You will be discharged with honors. Full pension, but your career is over." I felt a strange sense of relief. "Understood, sir." He looked at me, really looked at me. "Do you regret it, Commander?" I thought about the question. Did I regret saving the world? Did I regret killing my friends? "No, sir," I said. "I don't regret saving the lives of the millions. But I regret the cost. I regret that I had to be them." The Admiral nodded slowly. "That is the burden of command, Alara. It's a heavy one, but you carried it, and that's what matters." He stood up and extended his hand. I shook it. "Good luck, Commander," he said. "Thank you, sir." He left. I was alone in the office. I looked out the window at the base. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. It was beautiful. I packed my bag. It didn't take long. I didn't have much. Just a few uniforms, some books, and a photo of Jenny and me. I walked out of the base into the cool evening air. Rook was waiting for me by the gate. He had been discharged too, though he had chosen to leave voluntarily. He couldn't stay in the Navy after what happened. He couldn't look at the ships without seeing Deck 7. "Hey," he said, smiling faintly. "Hey," I said. "Where to now?" he asked. "I don't know," I said. "Home, I guess." "Home sounds good," he said. "I'm heading back to Ohio. Going to visit my parents. Maybe start a farm. Something quiet." "That sounds nice," I said. "What about you?" "I think I'll go to D.C., I said, "to see the cherry blossoms. Like we promised." Rook's smile faded slightly. "Jenny would have liked that." "Yes," I said. "She would have." We stood there for a moment, two survivors of a tragedy that the world was already beginning to forget. The news cycles had moved on. The Aegis was being repaired. The names of the 42 were listed in a small article on page 10 of the newspaper. But I wouldn't forget. "I'll keep in touch," Rook said. "Me too," I said. He hugged me, a brief, awkward embrace. Then he turned and walked away toward his car, toward his new life. I watched him go, then turned and walked toward the taxi stand. I had a plane to catch. The flight to D.C. was long. I sat by the window, watching the clouds drift by. I thought about the Aegis. I thought about the reactor. I thought about the silence. When I arrived in D.C., the cherry blossoms were in full bloom. The trees were covered in pink and white flowers swaying in the breeze. It was breathtaking. I walked along the tidal basin, the petals falling around me like snow. People were everywhere, taking photos, laughing, enjoying the spring day. They had no idea what had happened. They had no idea that their safety had been bought with the lives of 42 strangers. I found a bench under a large tree and sat down. I took out the photo of Jenny and me. She was smiling, her eyes bright with life. "I made it, Jen," I whispered. "I made it to the blossoms." I traced her face with my finger. "I'm sorry," I said. "I'm so sorry." A tear fell onto the photo. I didn't wipe it away. I sat there for a long time, watching the petals fall, watching the world continue to spin, watching the life go on. And I realized that this was my punishment and my reward. To live, to breathe, to see the beauty of the world that I had saved. to carry the memory of those who had died so that others could enjoy this moment. It was a heavy weight, but it was mine. I stood up and folded the photo, placing it carefully in my pocket. I walked along the basin, joining the crowd. I was just another person now. No longer a commander. No longer a hero. Just a woman, walking among the flowers. But I knew who I was. I knew what I had done. And I knew that I would never be the same. As the sun set, casting long shadows across the water, I felt a sense of peace. It wasn't happiness. It wasn't joy. But it was peace. I had paid the price. And now I could finally begin to heal. The story of the Aegis would be told in history books. It would be analyzed by experts. It would be debated by politicians. But for me, it was simple. It was a story of love, of loss, of sacrifice. And it was a story that I would carry with me every day for the rest of my life. I looked up at the sky, where the first stars were beginning to appear. Rest easy, friends, I whispered. I've got the watch now. And for the first time in weeks, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt full, full of memory, full of love, full of hope. I turned and walked home into the night, ready to face whatever came next. Because I had survived the fire, and now I was ready to live in the light.